Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss what is data-driven framework and how to read data from Excel and how to write data into Excel in Selenium. First, let us understand what is data-driven framework. For that, let us take an example. Let's say, for example, we already automated a login page. So a typical login page will have a username and a password, right? So when we are testing this login functionality, so we might be needed to verify different combinations. Like say, for example, what if I provide valid username and valid password? I provide username valid, but I provide incorrect password intentionally, and incorrect username and correct password. And I provide both username and password as invalid. I can provide username as blank and can provide password. So like this, we can have many more number of combinations for username and password to test the login functionality, right? So if we are going to actually automate this test case like a traditional way by providing all these combinations, so then our code becomes redundant, right? So in the script, our code becomes redundant. And even if you wanted to add more number of test cases also, that will actually add up and becomes more redundant. And also if there is any functionality change, right, in the login feature by any developer, so you might be needing to actually modify your code in multiple places, which again becomes difficult for you, right? So how do we resolve this problem? So let's discuss that now. Say for example, this is my application under test. This is my application which I wanted to automate. Here I have my test script. That is the code which was written to automate this application. Say for example, I have my test data here. Instead of having test data along with the test scripts, right? Separating test data from the test scripts. So now what happens? Test script should read the data from test data, which is external, and then it actually passes it as parameter to the actual script code, right? Then that script will be executed on the application. That's how the automation happens, right? So then what happens? Application, when you are going to automate something on the application, we are going to get something as an output, right? That is called actual output. And how are we going to validate this? So we usually have again a test script to validate that. So how do we validate that? We have the actual output here, fine. But how are we going to validate that? We need a source of truth for that, right? So the source of truth also, we can have it in the test data, which is external to the test script, right? Which here we'll have the expected test data. So we have the expected test data, which we read it from the external file, and we get the actual output from the application once the script is executed on the application. So that for that we'll have a script, we'll have a comparison or assertions written here, and that's how we actually say a test case is passed or failed. So with this, what happens? We are actually solving two problems, right? So if we wanted to add more test data for my same test case, then actually I can do that by adding the test data into my test data, which is an external file, which is not actually tightly coupled with the script. So there won't be the redundant code. And also if there is any change in the development in the feature which we automated, so we don't need to change that, modify the code in the script in multiple places. So at one place you can actually modify, as you are not having test data in your script, so it will be only at one place. So you just need to modify it at one place in your test script. So that also will be like easily maintainable, right? So these are the two problems which will be solved with this approach. And this whole part, right, is called as data driven framework. So to define, what we can say is separating our test data from the script or the automation code is what we call it as data driven framework, right? So test data, data set are synonyms. So separating or test data from the test scripts is what we can call it as data-driven framework. And this solves the redundancy of code, and the code is easily maintainable. And even if there is any change in the actual functionality in the development, so with a minimal change, right, we can actually solve the issue. Like we don't need to modify the code at multiple places. So this is what is solved with the data-driven framework. Now coming to the second part, that is this test data, right? How are we going to maintain this test data? So usually test data will be maintained in an Excel file or a CSV file. In Excel file, there are like two extensions, XLS and XLSX. We have XLX, XLS, and XLSX. These are the two formats for the Excel. So now we'll see how to read the data from Excel sheet. So unfortunately, we don't have any built-in API, Java API, or we don't have any API in WebDriver to read data from the Excel. So we need to depend on third-party library, which is called Apache POI. So just go to Google, type Apache POI. So click on the first link. So you see the downloads link here, click on that, and you see binary distribution, source distribution here. So source distribution is where we can find the source code of it. We need the binary distribution now. So just click on this zip file if you are working on Windows. If you are using any other operating system, you can download the tar file, which is at the top, the first one. So I'm going to download the zip file. So this is a third-party library, Apache POI, which is open source. So click on this zip file and click on this download link. So it starts downloading. So I'm going to cancel this as I already have the file downloaded. In your case, you allow complete file to be downloaded. And once the file is available, so we are going to extract this file. This is a zip file, right? So extract it. And you see here, so number of jar files here, right? So we need to add all these jar files to our project, as we wanted to read the data from the Excel. So I have a project created here. So I need to add all these jars to my project. Build path, configure build path, click on the libraries tab, add external jars, and select all the jars here. So you can't actually select this folder. So first let's add all these jars which are outside of these folders. And again, click on add external jars, OXML lib. Open that OXML lib, select all the files, Control A and add. Again, add external jars, go back. In the lib, you have some more jars, select all, open. So all the jars got added now. Just click on apply and close. So we associated the jar files, Apache POI libraries to our project now. Now we are ready to read the data from Excel sheet. So this is a sample XML file which we are going to read the data from now. So this is some cricketer info here we can see. So this we are going to read it. So let's see how to read the data from this Excel. So usually this Excel sheet, and we have sheets here, right? In the Excel book. So we have sheets. So within the sheets, like we have the data. So this is called, when we read it like this, from left to right, we call it as a row, and from top to bottom, actually from top to bottom, we call it as each row, right? So the player name, team, each one is called one column, right? So all together, if we take all this becomes one row. So this is all what we need, right? The info. And let's start automating this. So the first thing, to read the file, we need to have a file input stream object. So I'm going to create a file input stream object. And provide the file path here. This is the input file. So Holding shift key, right click on the file. So you get an option called copy as path. Click on it, get the path, copy here. Just remove the extra quotes here. So file input stream, add throws declaration. It throws file not found exception, checked exception, just add it. And then now we are going to start reading the data from Excel sheet. The first step will be, we are going to create an object of XXX workbook. New XXF workbook. So this is what the XXF workbook actually reads the Excel sheet, Excel file. So for this, it has to read it, right? So we pass the file input stream object to it. Add this XXF workbook from org.apache.poi. You see xssf model. This is the package. So we need to actually import this class from this package, XSF workbook package, right? Just add this checked exception again for XSF workbook as well. Now we have the workbook. So we read this Excel sheet. Now we wanted to read this sheet. So in an Excel sheet, we have different sheets, right? So we wanted to read this sheet called sheet 1. So how are we going to do that? Workbook dot get sheet is the method we are going to use to read the sheet and provide the sheet name. So my sheet name is sheet 1. So I'm providing that. So what does this get sheet method returns is it returns XSF sheet, right? So let's capture that into some object called sheet. Now we have the sheet. Import XSF sheet from the org.apache.poi package. Now I have the sheet. So from the sheet, I wanted to know first how many rows are there and how many columns are there. Then we can actually display or read the data from these rows, right? So how do we actually get the number of rows? Rows are counted from top to bottom, right? So if you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are 6 rows here. So even though your first row is a header, so the library doesn't know that it's a header. So we are just highlighting it, right? So all this is data for the library. So you can see here, there are, including the header, we have 6 rows. So how do we get that count is, we need to get that count. So how do you get that count? Sheet dot get last row number is the method we need to use. So there is a method called get last row num, which actually returns the last row number of this sheet. And remember, row index starts with 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So last row num index will be 5. So we are going to get 5 here. We are going to get 5 as the output for the get last row num. And this is returning integer. As it is returning index 5, but actual number of rows will be 6, right? So as index is starting with 0, we are going to get only 5, but the actual rows are 6. So let me add 1 to it. Number of rows is actually number of rows plus 1. This is the number of rows, right? So in the same way, we wanted to know how many columns we have. So how are we going to do that is, so from the sheet, I'm going to read any row, get row. So you can read any row using a method called get row. Get row of, you need to pass the row index. So you have index here, right, for each row. So you can take any row, as each row has same number of columns. So you can take any row index. So I'm going to take 0 as the index. So get row of 0 gives me the, the corresponding row, this row, first row. Fine. Dot, what I wanted to have is, I wanted to count the number of columns for that row. Get last cell num gives us the number of cells here, right? Again, index starts with 0. here 0, 1, 2, 3. But what happens here is, in case of get last cell num, it actually, though the index starts with 0, it actually returns the last cell num index, last index plus 1. So this is what we need to remember. Last index plus 1 is what get last cell num returns. So what happens in this case? We have 0, 1, 2, 3. Last cell num is index is 3, but still we are going to get the output as 4. So that's what the method is. Get last cell num actually returns last index plus 1. So we are going to get the output as 4 here. So let's also capture that in some int variable. So we have number of rows here and number of columns. So you just need to remember get last row num returns the last index, whereas get last cell num returns last index plus 1. Now let's actually print this number of rows and number of columns and verify. We have number of rows and these are the number of columns. Number of columns, we captured it in num calls. So let us verify this. So you can clearly see number of rows are 6. Yes, we do have number of rows 6. Number of columns are 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 columns, right? So till here, this is fine. Now we wanted to actually read the data from these rows and columns. So for that, we are going to write a loop. So for each row or till for all the rows, I'm going to write a loop. What we are going to get from the sheet dot. So we'll get row. So we'll use get row method to read each row. So I'm using r as the index to represent each row, right? So passing r here to the get row method, which actually returns the row, XSF row, right? So this is the object return. So let's capture that into an object, a row, right? Now we have the row. We have the row and we wanted to read each column from this row. So how are we going to do that? Again, we are going to write a loop for each column for this row. So each row, say for example, we are reading first row. For this row, we wanted to read each column. That's the reason we are writing another loop here. For each row, we have number of columns. So we are going to read each column here now. For that, row dot, for this row, what I wanted, each cell. So we call, how do we get each column is, we use a method called get cell and pass the column index. And we already have the column index as C here. So we pass C here. Sorry. So get cell of C gives us the actual cell, right? Get cell actually is returning XSF cell, right? So let's capture this in this XSF cell object. We have the cell now. So import this class also from arg.apache.py. Now we wanted to display this, what this cell has. All right. So with this, we are going to end the for loop. I think we already did that. Yeah. So this is for the inner loop and this for loop is for the outer one. So we are done with reading the Excel. For all the rows, we use the index R, and for each row, we have number of columns, right? So like 4 columns, we know. So to read all those columns, we have another loop. which is represented with the index C, column index, right? Now let us execute and verify. So you can see the data has been read here. So the same data here has been read, but it's actually printing the data in separate line. So this is because we give println here. We need to use print method to have it to be printed in the same line. And once we read one row, like columns of one row, then we wanted to print the next row in a separate line. So this is for displaying all the columns, right, for one row. So once we are done with this, then going to the next row, before going to the next row, we wanted to print a new line. So let's actually also do that, right? And also for better formatting, let's actually have 2 tab spaces. Yes, now you can see the format also in the, so it's like a almost similar format what we have in the Excel sheet, right? So you can see the data here. So this is how you actually read the data from Excel. So once you read this data, right, from the XXF workbook, so make sure you actually close this workbook.close, and also file input stream you need to close. So this is how you can actually read the data from Excel sheet. Now, in some cases, we wanted to write data into the Excel as well. Say, for example, we are executing, or we are reading the input from this Excel, and we wanted to create some Excel, some column here. Say, so for example, expected output or result column, and we just wanted to write it here, passed or fail, like that. So that after the automation, we wanted to check this file for each test data, right? So in such cases, the requirement is to write some data into the Excel, right? So what we'll do is I'll close this. I'll show you another Excel. So this is, let's actually clear this. And also I'll just name this as sheet 1. Okay, so let's say, for example, this is the new sheet, and I wanted to write some data into this sheet. So that's the requirement. So for that, let's actually create another class. I'll call my class as write Excel demo. As we are writing the data, we need to create an object of input stream, right? Earlier we used input stream, right? Now we will use output stream, file output stream. And we need to pass the path of the file. So this is the path of the file. Holding shift key, right click, copy as path, and provide the path here. Just need to remove the extra codes here, and we just add the exception. And how are we going to write the data? Again, we need the workbook. To read the Excel, we definitely need the workbook XXF workbook object. So let's create an object of XSSF workbook class. And first thing, we wanted to create a sheet. So we have a file, right? And then we wanted to actually create a sheet in it. So how do we do that is, we are going to create the sheet. So using workbook dot create sheet, we'll use a method called create sheet, and provide the sheet name here. I'll just provide the name as data to my sheet. It actually returns the XSF sheet object. So with this, it actually creates a sheet in the workbook or Excel sheet, right? Now we wanted to write some data into the sheet. So how are we going to do that? We need to know how many rows we wanted to generate and how many columns we wanted to generate. Let's say, for example, I wanted to return or write 5 rows. So sheet dot create row. I wanted to create a row here. So 5 rows. Create row, and then I'll actually provide the row index. Create row actually returns me the XSF row object. Now the one row has been created in the sheet. So within this row, I wanted to create some columns. You can create any number of columns. Say, for example, I wanted to create 4 columns, or you can even create 5 columns as well. We have the row dot create cell. Provide the column index here. Column index is C here. If you see here, C. So we created the cell. Again, create cell actually returns XSFL object. XSFL. Now using this cell object, we need to actually set the value, set cell value. And let's say, for example, you can write any data here. I'm going to write it as Selenium. So let me summarize. So we created a file output stream object to specify the file here in which we wanted to write the data to. We created the workbook object, and you see using the workbook object, we created the sheet. Now we have the sheet inside an Excel file, and we can write some, we wanted to write some data into the Excel sheet. So we created we wanted to create some 5 rows here. So we created a loop and we are creating rows here, right? For each row, we wanted to create some number of columns here. So for that, we actually use create cell method on the XSF row object, right? So using row object, we use the create cell method, and we have the cell or column. Within that column, we wanted to send some data. We wanted to set some data. So we are writing it as Selenium, right? Now, after each row, we wanted to have one new line character, right? So that's why I'm printing here as session.out.println, right? So once we are done with this, we wanted to close the workbook, right? So close the workbook and close the output stream. All right. So you can see here, let's check. This file has no data, output.xls, and make sure this file is closed before you actually perform any write operation. So if you keep the file open, then we'll get an error as the file will be having lock on it. Yeah, we didn't write any statement here that it is done, but it's actually done. So you can, okay. Actually, what happened is we didn't write this. Say, for example, we had this cell written into it, right? So, but this workbook has to be written to the output stream. So we missed that. So let's do that. Once the for loop is done, we need to workbook dot write it to the file output stream. So this step we missed it. So without writing it, it actually doesn't write anything into the output stream. So once you write it, you can actually close the workbook and close the file output stream. Now let us see. So it's actually done. And so in order that it is done, what we can do is we can also print something just for our reference. Right now, let's go back. Yeah, you can see it here. We wanted to write Selenium, 5 rows, like 5 columns. See, 5 rows and 5 columns, right? So this is how you can actually write data into the Excel sheet, or you can also have something written like this. If you wanted to have wanted to represent the index also for each row and column, you can do that. Yeah, it says write to Excel completed, right? So go back, open your output, and you can check it now. See, we just added the index row by column. That's what we can see it here in the output, right? So this is how we can actually write the data into the Excel. So in this video, we have covered what is data-driven framework, how to read data from Excel sheet, and how to write data into the Excel sheet. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching.